everyone and welcome. Today we are here to discuss a very important topic, well-being at the workplace. And in the light of the fourth edition of AXA's Mind Health report, we will focus today on mind health in the workplace. But before we kick off, we have some colleagues who shared their views on mind health. So let's have a look at it.
There's often a workload issue, and it affects different people in different ways, and you'll never have kind of a single experience for everyone. For me personally, it affects me less, I think, than a lot of my colleagues, but people talk to me all the time about how they're affected by workload and how it's affecting their mental health. I think the really difficult thing at the moment is to work out whether the biggest problem is work internal factors or kind of real life external factors.
So of course it's been impacted me directly or indirectly. For example, if we have a big project and the project goes well, it's a collective win, so I'll be happy and my colleagues will be happy, and I think we kind of foster that positive energy.
Yes, particularly in stressful periods or when projects do not develop necessarily the way I would like them to, it does have an impact on my mental health. And the way this projects on my coworkers is that I might be harsh sometimes, or worst case, I even try to avoid certain tasks.
I tend to celebrate small success that I get from my work. When I define as a small success, that means when any task is assigned to me, I tend to break it into a small individual activities. That means I get a chance to celebrate those individual activities as well, and I get motivated to finish those tasks as well at the same time. At the same time, it is equally important to have and to maintain the work-life balance and not to get stressed about the situation. By doing this, I always ask my mind, am I doing what am I supposed to do? And if the answer is yes, it is all sorted for me and it doesn't stress me much.
I'm probably known as the IT guy, and I have quite a strong understanding of the numerous IT issues that people can encounter. And it makes people feel like they can come to me when they have an IT problem. It's not necessarily the kindest thing in the world, but I think it helps when people, if they have a problem, they know there's someone they can go to fix it without having to go through any rigmarole.
It's recognising that we all experience different stresses, different strains in and outside of work. So for me, it's making my time available to my colleagues when they need me the most, to lend an ear, provide some advice, as a sounding board, and just to be there for them ultimately, because time is, in my opinion, the most precious gifts that you can have. So kindness breeds kindness, something we take really seriously.
So really great insights from our colleagues, and today I'm really happy to be joined by my colleagues Eugene, Kirsty and Virginie to discuss mind health at the workplace. Welcome and thanks for being here with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I might start with you, Virginie, a quick introduction on how do you look after your mind health?
Yes, thank you, Claudio, and thank you, everyone. So I'm Virginie. I have been an expat for most of my life, actually. I have lived in and worked in 6 different countries, so I'm very excited to be part of this panel today. In terms of how I look after my mind health, I think the first thing is I like to spend time with my family. They ground me. They also remind me of what's really important in life. And I also like to try and find fulfillment outside of work, and that's really important for me. So I do a number of activities. I'm a trained coach. I'm a mentor. I also am a school governor. So I do lots of other things, side hustles. And then finally, I also like traveling quite a bit. So, yeah.
So quite a variety of things then. Yeah,
absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. Kirsty, yourself?
Great, yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Kirsty, and I like the example of having different things outside of work, but I'm probably even more simple, or at least I will share a more simple thing. For me, it's really about the basics first. I like to say I'm a little bit like a dog, really. I need to sleep, I need to eat, And I need exercise. And when I say exercise, I mean in the broadest sense. So just to get out, to do something, to have some structure, to leave the house every day. So really simple things to start with, but without those, anything can be a challenge. So I would stick to the basics first.
I will remember that the dog approach to mind health. Thank you. Eugene.
So I'm Eugene Farrell. I'm perhaps a little bit more complicated then. If you're simple, I may be the opposite. So in my role, I suppose I might be expected to be a master of managing my mind health, but like everybody, I have my challenges, so I have to work at it. So I start with kind of self-insight, so I like to understand how I work, how I tick, and that takes some work to do that. Often I'm a curious observer of my own kind of thoughts, feelings, and actions to try and understand it. But in other ways, it's about managing, I guess, work-life balance. I'm quite strict about that. I try to do, my day in my day and not outside of it. But exercise and getting out, I think, are really important things for me. So anything outside is great. Gym 3 or 4 times a week for me. And bigger kind of endurance events, they all contribute fantastically to my mental health, I think, overall. Those are the kind of things I really like to do.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And I think what the takeaway, it's really individual how we go about these things, many ways to go about it. But perhaps if I may come over to you, Virginie, you have been, as you said, in different entities, countries for several times and several years. What are the challenges, but also perhaps the good things about being not in your home country?
So I have, as I said, I've lived in 6 different countries, and I've been an expat all my life. So I started when I was a young child. My parents were expats back in the days of no phones and no social media and forums and to connect each other. And then more recently, I've been living in the UK for 15 years now with my family, but I'm French. So I suppose challenges I found, interestingly, reflecting on this, you've got the usual ones, the ones when you first move to somewhere new as an expat. It's the admin ones, so finding somewhere to live, somewhere to school for your children, finding, in the UK, I remember still getting a phone, a mobile phone, but to do that you need a credit card, to do that you need an address. So the whole chain in itself was quite a headache. So you've got that sort of short-term things. And then I think for me, challenges more longer term I found, and that takes a long time, is more the small nuances. So, adapting to a new culture, especially in the workplace. It's about, the humor, the differences in humor, the being able to connect with your colleagues, that water cooler moment. And it's quite hard when you're in a new culture. And I've got plenty of anecdotes because over the years, especially I've lived in Japan, I've lived in the US, I've lived in the UK, I've lived in France, so very different cultures. So in Japan, you go into meetings, people will never look you in the eye, so it's very difficult to connect. But that's how they are, and it's very important. And then you go to the US, and it's almost the reverse. Everyone's just, overly nice and friendly. So adjusting to that is interesting. I always have this anecdote that I like to say about when I moved to the UK, coming from France, and I started working in France for a couple of years, and in France, in Paris especially, we did very long hours, finished at 8, 9 p.m. And it was about the longest you stay, the more you were really wanting it. And then I moved to the UK, and it was the start of my career, and I would stay on the latest of the whole business. I was working for EE, so a large business. I was probably the last one in the office. And at some point, my manager was very concerned. She asked me, "Why are you staying so late? What's wrong?" And I thought it was a good thing, but for her, it's like, no, for us, it means that you're less, you're less efficient if you're needing more hours than everyone else. And I thought that's really interesting. It's completely a culture thing that I need to adjust. And I suppose to your point about what's good about it is, in the reverse, is that it's really challenging, and it does have an effect on mental health and mind health. It's quite isolating at times, but it's also very enriching, I think. And so I think it's about being able to learn from it and spending time with people and colleagues and opening up. And I think it's fantastic, actually, in terms of finding out about others. But it does take a lot of work. yeah, so that's just my sort of initial thoughts. Really.
Excellent. And what are your coping strategies? As you say, it's sometimes stressful for different things. You don't really you can't change them. They just happen around you. So how do you go about it?
Yes. So, I mean, I actually touched on it. I suppose these days, what's great is that we are very connected. So, in terms of coping, we have access to, lots of networks, lots of forums, and I think that's what was different to when I think about my parents, actually, back in the days, was probably a lot more isolating and harder. So certainly in terms of coping, over the years, that I've reached out. There are forums on Facebook. You can find local networks of your local, fellow French people or wherever. So I think there's definitely ways of not feeling alone and sharing and exchanging fun ideas and anecdotes as well. And I think I do cope a lot with humor. So that's one thing. And the second thing is being very honest. So I also am quite honest with my peers and my colleagues, and it's a really good way. I mean, I use humor a lot to cope in any kind of situation. So that's probably my own way. But I do turn things into funny situations, and I find that at times that's actually quite helpful for me. So I think that's probably some ways of, yeah.
If I may, Kirsty, because you did it the other way around, yeah? You were English in France. How does that work?
Well, I was really smiling at the timing thing. The timing thing of being really late or not was definitely, I lived that the other way, so that was a surprise. But I think what it underlined for me, and you touched on it at the beginning, is sometimes the little things, and it can be the little things in life, the accumulation, the administration, the everything being a decision, when you go shopping and you're not used to the products. They're tiny things. And people in life are always going through little things that might build up to one more little thing at work that might be just the one that they don't cope with so well.
Yeah.
So I think we need to look out for people that are maybe going through it. A significant change might be a move, might be in their lives, and be a little bit more aware that for those people, something small might be a trigger. So you're right, it adds stress, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. So Eugene, as you said, you have an extreme wealth of experience as a coach, but also as a team leader. I think you've been 28 years with AXA, leading teams.
That's my second spell. I was here before that.
So any thoughts on how line managers, people leaders can help their teams to stay mentally strong and healthy in an environment that is not always easy?
So there's a lot to talk about, I think, in that space, and I'll try not to give all the examples. And we have to remember that one thing doesn't work for everybody. There's no one solution or one way of working or approaching things. And what works for me may not be so great for somebody else. So I think it's really important for line managers to look after themselves first. If you're going to look after your team, you need to look after yourself. So I like the idea of kind of self-check-in and understanding yourself. What are your thoughts and feelings, and what are those behaviours? What are your kind of triggers? And actually, if you look at the Mind Health study, there are kind of 10 things that we identify that can produce a great blueprint for good mind health. And we know from the study that those that thrive have got those 10. And those that are struggling don't have them. So if ever there was a blueprint to work to, I think it would be that. And we're not born with all these skills. We have to learn them. Some we learn really easily, some take a bit of work, and some we might never learn. We might have to work hard on to achieve them. But we can work on that over a period of time, so you can set yourself a way of kind of doing that. I think also for line managers, it's about things like being human. So authentic, empathetic. So look, listen, I think are really important at your team. So if you understand yourself, you can observe them, particularly in hybrid situations where it's much more difficult to read. So look and listen are two parts, but also we need to think about how we can lead and then how we can learn. So there's 4 L's to think about. And if we set really good examples as leaders, then that sets the tone, I think, for people to follow. And to learn, it's like we're not fixed in our ways of doing things. So, if we're prepared to accept or, have an acceptance that we might not be always perfect, then that can be a really useful tool. And so we can all learn by our errors or things that don't necessarily go the right way. But if we're always in performance mode, we'll never, and trying to achieve, then we never get to a learning mode where we're much more open-minded and open to lots of different things. So those are a couple of things from the line manager. From a team's perspective, it's about a psychological safe place where people can be themselves, when they can talk about their mind health in a safe space. I think you can set the tone for that. It's about encouraging connection and collaboration and communication, 3 C's, with your team. So if we can encourage people, again, with remotes and hybrid, that brings people together. And the power of teams, I think, is something enormous that we don't harness probably enough. And it's also about good work and, good workplaces. So make sure people are supported, make sure they have the tools to do their job properly, because we know that affects like stress and anxiety in the workplace. But also that they can talk to each other and they can talk to you. And we can set that tone, I think, overall. And the last thing that I think is about having a kind of mindful approach, like being present. So when we do check-ins, and I'm really keen on check-ins, as you can hear, then we're present in that moment. We focus and we give that person, all of the attention. I'm trying to do it now to each of you in that moment, rather than being distracted. I think it sends the wrong signal when you're focused on other things, when you're looking at the phone. So those are a couple of my thoughts on how we can do that. There's loads more that we can do, but that's a start, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked the beginning also when you talked about the necessity to look after ourselves. And I think you mentioned it too, and you did say, I think it's really something to really overcome, that it's not selfish to look after ourselves, because that's the only way we can be there for the other ones. Yeah, if we are not in the right space physically and mentally, you can't be there for the ones you love or for the employees. So I think that's a very important statement also, and there is work connected with that, yeah.
Yeah,
discipline you have to do every morning, the walk, but it's like it doesn't always come easy, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't always come easy, and you do have to work at it to achieve it, and it becomes a discipline, like many of these things. I've seen it over many years. You have to, you see management where it's, they're doing the same things over, and you have to kind of relearn to kind of do some of these things. Take a step back, this curious observer, and then think for a while, and that step back creates a bit of space.
How easy do you find it to really be in the moment? Yeah, I think one of the points to really be there when so much goes around you, Kirsten?
Yeah, no, I think, we all have very busy working days, but I really enjoyed what you talked about taking that moment in time. And what can be really powerful is not just to say, hey, how are you? And move on and say fine, but really let people know that when you ask, it was your point, I think, about check-in, that when we say, how are you, we're actually asking. And you also said listening, but you said listening and also observing, and I would say listening is also about watching and also about thinking and looking for patterns and looking for somebody whose behaviour who might have changed, looking for somebody, you talked about hours even. I mean, in the UK we're very conscious of if somebody's working really late, something might be wrong. In another culture that might not be what we look for, but watching, listening and thinking what you find. Yeah, hard work on top of everything else as a leader.
Well, of course it is.
Agreed.
Well, it gives that human aspect, doesn't it? And you can really feel the difference, as you were saying, that you can tell when somebody's, like even on a phone call, you can tell when somebody is not focused.
Yeah,
and
you can.
You can feel the difference.
Yeah,
even
they're checking their mails at the same time. We know it.
If I might just slightly change gears here, Eugene, obviously we talked about the tactics and things, how we interact with each other. How important in that setup is culture, the word we used, the culture of all of a team or of a company? How would you weigh that against what we discussed on the basic culture of a company?
I think over my years, I've seen some really awful cultures in organisations. I've heard some terrible things. I say over the years because they're still around. There are still some very, very difficult cultures. And, if you're doing, like all the things I talked about, if you had leaders who are doing all of that, it counts for nothing if the culture is bad. if the culture is toxic. So culture is, as you know, equally as important, I think, as behaviours, because that sets the tone, the pace, the way we treat each other, the way we act with each other. You're talking about the cultural difference in countries, cultural difference in companies is the same.
Yeah.
And we all must have felt it at some point when you walk into a business and you can feel that you feel something, you feel that culture, and it can be uncomfortable, or you can feel a culture that's like, wow, this is a really interesting place to work. Look how the people are happy and smiling, and people say hello, and all of those things. So culture is massively important, and it's, for some organisations that just happens from the top and the leadership. It can be about from the top and all the major leaders, but it can also be, I think, about how everybody operates, and that's, for me, is the kind of pinnacle of culture. If everybody knows how it works, and it's just natural, isn't it?
Yeah. So there's probably a good question for you, Kirsten. Given your role you have with AXA, how do we do this? How do we instill a culture of 140,000 people, 50 countries? How do we do this?
That's a terrifying question, right? I can't be there, as Eugene said, smiling at everybody every morning, even though I'd like to be. And we can't be everywhere all the time. But I just wanted to reflect on something you said, that we all must remember the impact we have on the people around us all the time, and definitely leaders who set the tone. But every single person, when we walk into a workplace, we are also influencing the culture. Yeah. So everybody's responsible. We can say it's my job title, but it's definitely, absolutely everybody's job. What we do at AXA, knowing that we are, spread across so many countries, touching so many people, is try and at least set the tone and give some guidelines. And last year we launched a programme called We Care, which is about physical as well as mental well-being, but gives people some ideas about what caring can mean. And you mentioned, a big life event which is moving country, but people go through life events like starting a family or even trying to start a family, caring for people in their family, going through difficult health challenges. So the policy We Care, which is very deliberately not AXA Cares, it's We Care, all of us. We show that AXA Cares with policies that support people when they're caring for a family member or an elderly parent, when they have a new family, when they might be facing a very difficult situation at home or with their own health. So we have very specific policies that give people the time to deal with that, give them the support that they need. But by even just talking about them, and you mentioned raising awareness, by making it normal to talk about the fact that we have good days and bad days, that we have different challenges in life, we help our organisation talk to one another, show care from the organisation towards the people that work there, but also help them then show that they care for one another and take a challenge. So I can't be everywhere, but by the end of this year, we will have policies in place that hopefully set the tone, and then we rely on the great people that we have working for us to make that real every single day.
Definitely a huge task, but I think we have to take good first steps to get there.
That's right.
If I may, I would like us to just move to a small question to wrap up everything. It's a big question, but we try to keep it short. Kindness, especially in a world where we have hybrid setups, where we have lots of media around us. I mean, you just say, life sometimes is hard, and it's not the reality we have on Facebook. So what is the role of kindness in the workplace for you? What does it mean? Is there a place for it?
Yes, absolutely. I think there is a place, especially, as you say, as the more we are remote, hybrid, the more we are fast-paced, the more I think it's actually quite essential that there is a place for kindness in the workplace. And it's not at all, it's a great word, and it's actually great. I'm really passionate about it. For me as well, kindness is not the grand gestures. Really, I was reflecting on what kindness means for me. And you talked about demonstrating as a leader or leading by example. So it's very important to me, so I do try and demonstrate kindness to encourage that the team needs to be kind to each other. And for me, it's really the small things. So there's two things, really. We talked about it already. It's one, the gift of time. So I'm very, very busy, but I do try and always be available or be able to give some time if people need it. And I think that's probably the biggest gift you can give, is that gift of time. So just a few minutes, but and so it's not, it's that, and then we talked about it's listening. So checking in. So even just regularly asking people how they're doing when you see them, or if they are remote, checking in quite regularly actually how they are. I feel that's probably what defines for me kindness is it's those two simple things, really.
Yep.
From my perspective, yeah, I think it's essential.
Mm-hmm. Eugene?
So I've got a lot to say about this, but I'll talk about the kind of psychological aspect. So I want to talk first about what kindness is psychologically, but also about self-kindness, because that's hugely important. And you're absolutely right, it isn't about big gestures all the time. It completely isn't. And that can seem quite artificial sometimes. So kindness is a kind of pro-social behaviour. It's associated with being generous or being kind in some ways. It improves our sense of well-being. It improves our mood. It improves the way that we feel generally from our mind health, and that's really important. We know that that kindness is contagious, and that's great, isn't it? Because when you work with kind people, then you feel good and it spreads in the team. So it's something to definitely develop in organisations. But from a psychological aspect, we get this benefit to both. We know that the giver and the receiver of kindness both benefit from those psychological aspects. You get release of serotonin and dopamine, positive, happy hormones. So that's good. By these tiny things, we can make us and somebody else feel better. We also get oxytocin released. Now that's the love hormone. Now steady. We're not having love relationships here, but that oxytocin is protective to our heart, for example, and it also is countering stress. So there are psychological and physiological benefits to being kind. So it's definitely worth doing. And a smile, opening a door, getting somebody water. It's tiny things. There's no grand gestures needed. But the kindness to ourselves is something really important to think about. And often we are our own biggest critic. We overjudge ourselves. And we're not kind to ourselves and our own performance. So we have to live in a world, or try to live in a world, where we're kind to ourselves too, where we accept that we're not perfect, that we do make mistakes, and accept, we're human beings, and not overjudge ourselves and allow us to make mistakes. So kindness to ourselves and to others. That's what I would like to say.
Okay, cool. Tracy?
Well, the benefit of going last is I can say clearly I agree, and building on that. And I started with a simple one, so if you'll allow me, I'll finish with a more complicated one.
You can.
I'd like to say, based on what you said as well, both of you, to assume kindness. So one of the ways we're sometimes not kind to ourselves and other people is assuming that somebody else's behaviour isn't kind or is very much directed at us. And I think if we can assume that maybe it wasn't about us, or maybe they're having a bad time, or maybe they meant to be kind but just got it a little bit wrong, then we give that kindness to ourselves because we don't get het up about something that wasn't good, and we're kind to the other person. I mean, then we check, and if they're being unkind, then of course we don't take it. But I think giving people the benefit of the doubt that most of the time we're trying to be kind, and there's good intention behind. So I think by assuming kindness rather than, especially like you said, we're not always together. When things are distant, when we're not working in the same place, we can make a mistake in interpretation. So kindness in interpretation would be my one.
Excellent, cool. So a lot of, I think, really interesting thoughts. I just wanted to add one thing, because often people confuse kindness with low performance. So it's nothing to do with it. I think you can run a super high-performing business still being kind. It's really how we go about things. Yeah. So very interesting points. I do think there is one piece also, depending on the culture, obviously that kindness is seen as not being driving for performance. And I think that's it's not true. I think it's an element that drives performance ultimately. As we said, it makes people feeling safe, invested, but also you get the best out of people by being good to them. And I love what's the part that it's not about big things. I always think like a good morning in the morning with a small smile, that makes a big difference. Even if you don't know the other one, it just helps. Good start into the day, typically.
So it makes good business.
It does. So thank you all very much for having spent time with me, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the second part of our conversation. I'm delighted to be here with Patrick. Thank you for being here.
Hello, Claudio.
Over to you for a quick introduction, and how do you look after your own mind health?
Well, I'm Patrick Cohen, and personally, I set aside time to my loved ones. That's the best thing I find to take care of my mind health. It's of essential importance to me. So typically what I do is I spend most of my spare times in building Legos with my 2 young sons, in spending hours playing music with my daughter. Playing music is a fabulous way actually to relax and reload the batteries. And I try as much as I can to exercise, because I believe that a healthy mind in a healthy body is absolute truth.
Thank you for that. And I agree with you again, it's work, you have to look after yourself, so, and obviously you are a great role example for your kids, they will grow up with it, so thank you. Patrick, on the back of the 4th edition of the Mind Health Report of AXA, a question, why does AXA care about mind health?
Well, mental health is a major issue, actually across the world. I think this is one of the main insights that our survey is again showing this year. And it's first and foremostly a human issue, because when we talk about mental health issues, we're talking about disorders that affect the quality of life of people. So, you know, we're dealing with anxiety, depression, more difficulties in managing the daily stress of our lives. So first and foremostly, it's profoundly a human issue. The second thing, it's an economic challenge. If you look at the stats of the World Health Organization, the cost of mental health globally is approximately 1 trillion. Mm-hmm. So this has a huge impact on our economies. And as AXA, being one of the global leader insurer when it comes to health, I think we are in the front line on this topic. In the front line means that that we actually spot those trends in the first place, and we play a key role in raising the awareness around the mind health topic. I mean, again, if you look at our survey this year, we saw that almost a quarter of all the people we surveyed said they've taken a sick leave for mental health reason in the last 12 months. This is quite significant. And we're also in the front line as an insurer because we are in direct contact with a number of emerging risks that impact actually the mental health of individuals. Yep. This is what we have identified in the risk report. We live in a context of a polycrisis where individuals are struggling to cope with a number of evolution in our societies. Obviously, climate change. We know that eco-anxiety is one of the root cause impacting mind health, but we can talk also about geopolitical tensions, economic pressure, or the explosion of cyber threats. All of this creates an environment where people feel more fragile. So I think for us, the objective is to demystify the subject and free the taboos. We want to promote the awareness by sharing the findings, certainly, but this is not about adding anxiety to anxiety. This is about triggering things that will drive action around it. So ultimately, what we want is through this survey that professionals, policymakers, the general public take actions in investing more in the prevention of mental health. As an insurer, obviously, at the back of that, driving those prevention actions and offering the solutions that are tailored to the needs of the mind health situation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, and I think you're absolutely right, being a force for good in here to drive the improvements and give people hope and the tools to improve themselves is exactly, I think, what we should do. So thank you for that. I'm very happy to be here with Jessica and Charlotte for the next round. Again, if you could introduce yourself quickly and share with us how you look about your own mind health.
Sure. So I'm really happy to be here as well. My name is Jessica, and the WISE Center, among some of our other work, we've recently published a report called How to Make Societies Thrive. The idea is to look at the ways in which mental health shapes and is shaped by all the other aspects of our life, and then moving beyond that, how you engage with stakeholders outside of the healthcare sector to promote mental health. And I mention it in part because we use some AXA data from the Mind Health Survey to support this report, so thanks very much to AXA for that. But to your question, so how do I take care of my own mental health? I think I really just try and focus on the basics. So sleep enough, drink enough water, and move. It doesn't fix everything, but it's a really good start.
Yeah, that sounds a very good start, yeah. Charlotte, over to you.
Yes, I'm so pleased also to be here today. So I'm Charlotte, I'm French, as you can guess from my accent. I've got the dual citizenship, French and British, and I've been living in the UK for 18 years nearly now. How do I take care of my mental health? Sports and social life are very important to me, so I try to mix both by doing some quick chat and runs with friends.
Excellent. So thank you for that. What we will do now is explore a little bit the correlation between businesses, their employees, employers, and the governments, and how all of this they should work together to drive better health, mind health in the population. So first, over to you, Charlotte. 6 out of the 7 of us who have been involved in these conversations live in a different country or have lived in a different country. What are the specific challenges and also remedies when it comes to mind health for expats or for people who are just living abroad?
Yes, so before answering your question, Claudio, I would like to say that here I will talk about expat using a very broad definition. So expat being people living outside of their home country. So what we see is that expats have very specific challenges that they are facing. Short-term challenges, and I think that Virginie mentioned some of them, and also more longer-term challenges because you are facing language barriers. It lasts. You've got also some culture challenges that you can have, including differences in terms of business culture. And you're lacking kind of a support network when you are abroad. So all of this could create some stress and have an impact on your mind health. So we are pulling together currently an expat edition of the Mind Health Report, and we are starting to see some interesting trends for expats because we've tried to focus on the expat population, looking at the data for these people. And overall, in terms of mind health, expats are on par with locals. However, it's interesting to see that these long-term trends that I was mentioning got an impact on this expat population when it comes to the workplace. And what we see is that expats are experiencing, for example, more burnout in the workplace. Mm-hmm. It's very aligned to a report that we produced a few years ago on World of Work, where actually we found that 20% of expats experience some mind health issues when they are in an international assignment. So in summary, expats seem to be more vulnerable in the workplace and they need some support.
Thank you for that. Anything you can relate to, Jessica, given that you also live not in your home country, to what Charlotte just said?
Sure. So I am from the US, as you might be able to tell from my accent, and I've been in France since 2018 with the OECD for most of that time as well. And I think, one thing that really stands out from some of our work at the OECD at the WISE Center is the importance of social relationships, social interactions, and social networks for your mental well-being. And I think that really speaks to some of the challenges that expats in particular face. If you're in a new country, in a new system, trying to navigate in a different language, it's hard to have that informal social support to help you navigate some of those challenges. And so it's not surprising to me in that sense that you're seeing some of that then play out in your survey results.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, the OECD is obviously active in more than, I think, 30 countries, driving the mind health overall for the population. Any best practices you have seen or initiatives that is worthwhile mentioning because they could be replicated between governments, private sector?
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, primarily we're working with governments, with national governments, and there are 38 different member states. And so what we do in our work, and this is in the report that I mentioned earlier, we're trying to do two things. So on the one hand, we're trying to understand and identify what are some good policies to prevent mental ill health and promote good mental health. But the second thing we're trying to do is to look at processes. So how are governments collaborating across agencies or across different sectors, so with the private sector, with civil society, in order to implement these types of cross-sectoral initiatives. And so I think looking at labor market policy is an interesting way of doing so. It's pretty illustrative. So we know that having a mental health condition means you're more likely to be unemployed, but it also means that if you are employed, you're more likely to have challenges with being productive and present in the workplace. At the same time, we know that unemployment and job strain and poor working conditions, all of these things directly harm our mental health. So the point being, it works in both ways simultaneously. And in fact, some OECD research suggests that the cost of mental ill health can be as high as 4% of GDP. And so this is taking into account direct and indirect costs, so loss of productivity, increased absenteeism, but then also direct spending on things like social services and healthcare costs. Beyond that, of course, there's an intrinsic value in having good mental health, and I think we can all agree on that, beyond just what that means for your productivity. So the point is, it matters, and I think the point is also clear that it matters not just to healthcare professionals and not just to individuals who are struggling with their own mental health, but this should matter to employers, and it should matter to government agencies that are tasked with crafting social policies and labor market policies. So in our report, we're highlighting some of these win-win policies that are trying to do just this, targeting work conditions, but then also promoting good mental health. And some examples that we talk about in the book. So one, adding things like psychological distress or stress, these types of measures to national occupational health and safety guidelines, providing toolkits to employers. So this can be things like evaluation guides and how-tos, so they can promote a healthy workplace and then also promote well-being. And scheduling regular employee and manager stress tests. So this is something that's integrated then with the healthcare system.
Yep.
So if an employee is identified of being at risk, they can be referred to a healthcare professional directly without trying to navigate on their own. And so importantly, all of these examples that I've just given you involve multiple agencies or multiple stakeholders. It's not just in the healthcare sector.
And that's where it gets complicated.
Exactly. It is. That process is tricky.
And Charlotte, given what Jessica just mentioned, do you see any of that in the business you run? Some of these complexities of different countries having different approaches and having a multitude of institutions who have to work together?
Yes, absolutely, and it's very interesting hearing from Jessica and hearing what you say about the working environment and how the working environment is super important. And it's interesting because when you look at expats, many expats believe that the workplace where they are doesn't provide them with the environment that they need to have a flourishing well-being, and it's quite concerning. I mean, many expats states that basically they believe that their employer don't take the measures that they should take to take care of the mind health of their employees. And when we look at data, more than half of the expats will not go to their manager if they've got a problem with their mind health. So it's quite concerning, and you're thinking, okay, what could we do to try to address this? And we see in our business, so international healthcare, that there's probably something that we can do about it. International health insurance is seen by the HR decision maker and expat worker as the most valuable benefits when you have to choose. And we think that this type of benefits can, of course, give a peace of mind to expats, but also can have a role to play to try to bridge this gap around mind health. So one thing that we've implemented fairly recently in our offer on our international health program is to offer virtual mind health care. So what does that mean? It means that people can have access to qualified psychologists in the language of their choice. They don't need to talk to their employer. They don't need to have a referral from a GP, for example. And they've got access to sessions with a psychologist. And the outcome is pretty conclusive. All the people who've used this service have seen that they've seen an improvement in their mind health after this session. So, as you were saying, Jessica, this type of service help, of course, employees, but also employers, because there's less sick leave, less demotivation at work, more retention, so it's great. So we think that it's very important to make sure that we support the expats when they've got an experience abroad and support them in their mind health. And insurance got a role to play, probably with government, to try to make it happen.
Okay. Thank you for that. And Jessica, if I just take again the macro view that you look at, where do you see the hope, the peace, that because it's quite a difficult environment and we have seen the numbers get worse every year or don't really get better. Where do you see the hope, the tunnel that we could take that brings us to light from your point of view?
Yeah, and it's true, as we've heard over the series of conversations today, there's a lot that's very challenging and there's clearly a lot of work ahead. But I think what's really hopeful is just looking at the amount of attention that the topic of mental health is getting. And it's not just the quantity of attention, it's also who is paying attention. And I do think that's really changing. So you're seeing new stakeholders in government and in the private sector engaging in conversations that previously maybe would have been more rare. So we know that mental health is a shared responsibility. If we want people and their families and communities to thrive, we have to consider broader living conditions as well. And so that means systematically integrating mental health considerations into policy. And I do think there's growing recognition of that fact. Mm-hmm. So whereas in the past maybe a CEO or a government minister who's in charge of economic or employment policy might have said, mental health, what does that have to do with me? I don't get it. The types of conversations we're having today show I think that that's changing. And so that I do think that's hopeful. And when you look at a national government level, especially since COVID and the COVID pandemic, there are a lot of national strategies that are specifically targeting mental health considerations. Yep. A lot have a youth focus, but a lot as well care about the workplace and what mental well-being in the workplace looks like. So I think, really making mental health a policy priority, putting it at the top of the policy agenda and, of course, funding it, these are all really crucial first steps that are, I think, quite hopeful.
Excellent. And if I might add, because it brings, I think, the whole conversation together. As you said, people have to work together to solve for this. I think the ones who also have to work on this is the individuals. I really do think there is also hope in all of us. We have the capacity to change, to cope, to understand that we cannot change the world around us, but we can decide how we react to it, and working actively on our mental and also physical health, I think, helps. As you all said, we have to work on being in a good place. And I think with the help of the institutions around us and the positive approach of individuals to what we do, accepting what happens, but also working on being a good place, I do think there is a way, absolutely, that we all can flourish in the future. So thank you for that. Thanks for your time, and see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.